Good day. I'm Martin Gago with Market Radius Research. It is Thursday, May the 4th, and we've got CEO Greg Ferron of Platinex joining us. Platinex acquires and advances precious and battery metals projects in Ontario. Greg's here to outline the story and discuss some of the coming catalysts for the company, but please remember, this is neither a recommendation or investment advice. We're here to learn about the company. Greg, thanks a lot for taking the time to join us today, and let's hear about Platinex.
Okay. Hi, Martin. Thanks for having me, and certainly a pleasure to be discussing this with your audience. And yeah, nice to be here today. And as mentioned, I am the CEO of Platinex. And why don't I just start off by telling you a little bit about how I got involved with Platinex.
Great.
And then we'll get into the story. And as you said, for yourself and others, please feel free to ask questions as we move forward. I don't mind being interrupted. So just in terms of background, I started off in capital markets, and then I've been involved the last at least 10 years in different juniors. And when I was the CEO of Treasury Metals, we sold some ground between the Aris's Juby deposit and Platinex's Shining Tree project in the Timmins, south part of Timmins. And that was, I guess, in the middle of 2020. And Treasury became one of the largest equity holders. And as a result of that, I joined the board. And then Treasury went through a process of getting its mine permits, completing a large acquisition, creating quite a large development gold story in Ontario. So I moved on from that. And the timing worked out quite well because I had been on the board for Platinex for about a year. So I got to know the people, kind of got to know what some of the issues were. And we decided to start adding some of these projects I had identified. The founder of the company, Jim Trussler, resigned or retired, actually. He was in his 80s and had a long, distinguished career at Teck in Falconbridge. So it was a great fit bringing in a capital markets person combined with his technical skills. He remains on the board today. And then we started adding some projects into the portfolio. And so that's probably a good entry point. And if you want, I can just continue into the PowerPoint.
Perfect.
Sure. Okay. So since then, I guess that was about, say, 15 months ago. We've done a lot of work to enhance the portfolio, enhance the shareholder base, the board, the technical team. And, our strategy is acquiring and developing projects in Ontario. We have 3 district scale projects. They're in both the battery metals and the precious metal sector. They're all large scale, meaning, big land packages. And all these projects have been previously worked on by major producers in Canada. So Inco, Falconbridge, for example. And we acquire these projects. The benefit of that is you're getting projects in good jurisdictions. You're getting a lot of historical work done on these projects. So we can really move them quickly through exploration and development. And with that, they're all located in good locations, prolific camps. And since a lot of these majors have owned them, like Inco, Falconbridge, a lot's happened in the regions. So, for example, new mines have come into production, as in the case of Côté Gold, IM Gold's Côté Gold. So we have that ground there. And so that's really the strategy. The one project we put in was a copper nickel platinum palladium project in the northern part of Ontario. You can see it right here in orange. I'm circling. We acquired that just prior to the BHP Wyloo bidding war for a very similar looking project called Eagle's Nest, owned by Ferron at the time. And we put in, I think it cost us about 300,000 in shares in cash. And there's been about 10 million spent on the project. And we've been able to put back the Lansdowne House, was the former name of the project, into this new company. And the timing's great because you've had that bidding war take place, and then a lot of infrastructure plans to open up the north are underway. We also have a nice gold portfolio as well, located in the southern part of Timmins. Of course, that's much further south, where lots of infrastructure, lots of operating mines. We recently did a joint venture transaction on those 2 projects. So I'll get into that in more detail later. There's been a lot of work done on Shining Tree and Mallard. And the next 2 years, we've got about $3 million of capital we're going to put into drilling those projects. And that's going to be our primary focus this year. And next, they're actually in the field this week. And next week, we'll begin announcing the work we're going to undertake on those 2 projects. And then finally, I won't get into too much detail today. We also picked up another project called Muskrat Dam, which is another copper nickel project owned by Inco. And there we're focused on the lithium potential. We've also got a royalty portfolio, again, all focused on Ontario projects, giving you more exposure to Ontario and those different projects. And the other final intro comment I'll make is Ontario, I think, is a great place to work for mining. I spent most of my career either working in the capital markets here or in mining projects in the northern part of Ontario, in particular in northwestern Ontario. And there's a real push in Ontario. We've got that big automobile manufacturing sector, as you're aware, in the southern part of Ontario. And then you've got obviously the US automobile manufacturing sector as well. There's a real push to develop the mines in the north to supply and develop that sector. So there's been a lot of improvements in terms of permitting, improvements to tax credits, improvements for infrastructure coming in, and this is actually happening. You're seeing the government's investing in these projects, which is starting to encourage other types of investment coming into the sector, and I think that'll continue over the next decade.
All right.
So if you have any questions on that, or I can just continue, but just quickly, I won't spend too much time in this because that's going to be on the website, but here's the team. It's a nice mix of technical people. James, as mentioned, and Felix are both geologists. Sam, Christoph, and myself are all tech capital markets background. Graham is our CFO. He's also involved with Goliath Gold, which has been one of the success stories in Canada, in BC, and I believe they're out doing quite a large financing at the moment. And then Robbins helps us out on the community. And in the intro, I mentioned we've been acquiring these projects. And one thing that's quite unique is a technical team that has worked on these projects when they were previously owned by these operators like Falconbridge or Noranda. So they have that experience at the time, but they also are now helping us move these projects the last couple of years. So Blaine, for example, has done a lot of work on the Juby deposit and in Shining Tree. Ike did all the drilling for Aurora Platinum and FNX when they owned the copper nickel project. Fred Breaks is considered one of the top lithium experts in Canada, and he's done a lot of work in Ontario and in particular Muskrat Dam. And yeah, before I get into the projects, I think I've covered a lot of this. Just wanted to look at the chart, and the stock does trade quite well. We trade about 100 million shares a year. I'll get into some of the new shareholders we have, but it looks like it's an attractive entry point. We've been consolidating now for about 18 months. And now we're stock's up trading above its short-term and long-term average, and we're going to have a lot of news over the next 18 months. And just wanted to highlight a lot of the things we've completed over the last year. We just closed a $2.7 million financing. We brought in a joint venture partner, some new assets. And now this next year is really going to be about exploration and then continuing on some interesting strategic transactions we've got in the pipeline. Just quickly on our capital structure. So we trade mainly on the CSE under the symbol PTX. We're just in the process of getting our F11 filed, or 211 filed in the US. So we're going to start having the volume there as well. So the market makers will start first, and then we'll be trading on the QX shortly. We've got about 20% ownership by five mining companies, 3 public and 2 private. And I think that gives a lot of credibility and stability in the stock. Myself and the founder have about 10%. Maybe it's 15% if you sort of include some of our, closer contacts. We've got a big European shareholder base, done a lot of work over the years with different mining companies in Europe, and we've got a good following with some family offices in Switzerland, in particular in France. We've got a good shareholder base in Quebec. We've actually got about 10% of our shares held in Alberta as well. So nice diversification. And now the focus with the exploration is going to be trying to look at adding some institutions to the shareholder base. And as mentioned, we just financed raising about $3 million. And then we've also got that joint venture partner.
Greg, sorry, can you flip back one? On the 3 mining companies, the Alamos, Treasury, and Fancamp, did they put in hard dollars, or was it sort of in exchange for properties and sort of as a result of transactions, so to speak?
Yeah, good question. Fancamp put in the hard dollars in that recent placement. So that placement we did was done about a third. They put in about 1.2. A group at a Canaccord did kind of the balance, and then a little bit of Europe and Quebec. And then Alamos, we bought the former producing mine at the Shining Tree project from them. I can show you that later. And then
Yeah.
Treasury as well. I can just flip through it to it now. So this is the ground that Treasury sold to get their shares. And then the producing mine we bought from Alamos is called Rhonda. They operate the Young-Davidson, and they're quite keen on the whole district, I believe. So they like the idea of becoming an equity holder and having a bigger regional play on the Shining Tree camp.
Yeah.
That's how they got involved. And I know they're still a shareholder.
Excellent. All right.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, I guess my thought is, in the market in general, obviously I know the juniors are soft at the moment, but I do think it's been a long sort of grind the last 10 years sort of down, but you've seen the venture index bottom out last year. You're starting to see, there's a lot of discussion about, battery metals and how important mining energy is. And I think you're starting to see some of the big cap M&As everyone's probably aware of, for example, Tech. There's a number of names in the lithium sector, Hudbay bought a copper producer. So, you're starting to see M&A at the Newmont and the Newcrest. Another
And we
example.
got $2,000 gold. So that should be excellent.
Yeah, exactly. And then the commodity prices are strong. And, and so I think we're just around the corner for starting to see, major amount of capital coming into the commodity sector. And that's really our strategy. We put these assets together, we put the people together, we got a good shareholder base, we've got the company property financed, and now this year is going to be all about, and next year about moving these projects forward with exploration. So we're going to focus really on the gold portfolio and Timmins, and I do expect that camp to be consolidated with a lithium project. We're financed to sample the lithium this season, so that'll happen in the summer. And then I do think there'd be opportunities down the road to spin that out or divest. And then our sort of flagship project we spent last year, increasing the size of it, getting it permitted. And now it's going to be about, drilling that in a couple phases to expand on that historical resource. So now if you want, I can just get into the projects, and I'll just do a couple slides on each project, and just starting with our gold portfolio. So this is the Timmins camp, is located a little bit further north. You've got these major structures that moves across Timmins into the Abitibi, through Ontario and into Quebec. And we're on the Rideout Deformation Zone, which is south of Timmins. And you've got some major deposits like Newmont's Borden mine is located just further west. And you come across and you've got obviously the Cote project, which is going to be in production next year. And IAMGOLD sort of turned that around and looking like it's going to be quite an interesting development for them next year. And then we have the large Shining Tree. It's about 250 square kilometers. We put that together. Beside us is Juby deposit, which is owned by Aris Mining, and Alamos is located over here further east with their Young-Davidson. So lots of infrastructure, lots of roads, as you can see. We've got about 350 square kilometers between the two packages here. We just bought this project from Fan Camp. It's part of that joint venture where they're going to spend about $3 million in total to earn 50% interest. And the reason we did that, it will allow us to accelerate drilling this year, because I do think this camp is going to get consolidated. I think IAMGOLD, when they're in production next year, is going to look for other opportunities in the camp, including the Shining Tree camp and probably the Juby deposit. So both these projects have seen a fair bit of exploration work. So the guys are in the field right now. We'll start announcing the programs next week. And there's going to be a combination of, two-phase program of drilling. And then we'll continue doing early stage exploration work. So, we're looking through the data right now. We'll be in the field getting the best targets ready. And realistically, there'll probably be a combination of drilling some of those best targets earlier in the program. And then we'll continue some of the early stage exploration work like soil sampling. So for example, if you've got a really high golden till sample and an IP target, it may make sense to do some geochem around that target first, and then get that ready, depending on the results later in the year. And So yeah, so we'll get those press releases out, one for Shining Tree and one for Heenan and Mallard as they get in the field, and we begin the drilling and the early stage exploration. And just talking specifically about Shining Tree, the Rhonda was the former producing mine we bought from Alamos. There's an historic resource in and around Herrick. So we'll do a bit of exploration, expanding that resource and seeing if we can expand that at depth. But the real potential is just on the greater area outside that central area where this project's been consolidated through a number of acquisitions. And the last couple of years since Treasury got involved, we encouraged Jim to let's look at the greater property. So there's been 600 gold till samples. There's been IP done across the project, trenching, sampling, mapping. Last summer, we did 2,000 soil sample results, SGH, hydrocarbon. So we'll announce those results next week. And then we're just going to continue that work as well in some of these newer areas. And that's how we're developing all these new targets. And so at the end of the day, we'll be able to do a combination of drilling the new targets, looking for a discovery, and then expanding on the central past producing area. And you can see some of the results here, 35 meters over a gram, right at surface. Platinex drilled 4 grams over 5 meters to give you an idea. And so we'll follow up with some of those results. And that's the same thing with Heenan Mallard, the other project I showed you up by Cote.
Greg, sorry, can we just go back? I want to, before we get, so there's an old mine that's been closed down. Is there any opportunity to reopen that mine, or is that that part has been sort of mined out and now you're to closeology, you had a great deposit or there was a great deposit there and now looking for what's in the vicinity, or is there opportunity to open up that, reopen the old mine?
Yeah, it's not something you'd want to reopen. It's one, it really needs to be drilled to sort of get an idea of the actual resources. It's one of these historical mines where they never developed the resources like you would today. You wouldn't. It wasn't drilled off, say, to a 1 million ounce deposit. They would just mine, along the veins. And we just consolidated that from Alamos. So I think they had the surface and we had the down dip. So it's the first time it's sort of been under one roof, the owner. Okay. And so it does make sense to poke a few holes and see what type of results were there. But yeah, it's not like a recent producing mine. There's been about 20 bulk samples done around the project at different operators, at different time periods. So, but they were always looking for quick production. So now it's something nowadays you need to find a commercial deposit that would fit at least a 500,000 ounce open pit, or because you've got nearby operating mines, so it doesn't need to be a standalone type project. You could, in theory, find 1 million ounces near the surface and have that to be economic. Okay. Yeah.
Gotcha. And how many drill holes have you punched into the property?
Yeah, so Platinex itself has done 62 drill holes, mainly in the central area, and they all had gold and some decent results right at surface. Yeah. So the question there is, do you have a commercial deposit, or are you, realistically better to look at some of these? Because, the big deposits in the area are on the Rideout deformation zone. So that's why we're looking up in this area in particular. And then down around the Aris deposit, we found some very interesting, either high-grade samples or interesting results from IP, and the soil sample we've been doing would be showing, very interesting anomalies that you'd want to drill. Yeah. It looks small, but that's 250 square kilometers. So that's quite a large land package. And then the same thing with.
And with those 62 holes you've punched in there, is there a resource estimate off of that, or is it just you're waiting to do more work to sort of piece it together?
Yeah, there is a resource. I mean, it's small, somewhere around 200,000 ounces. Okay. So yeah, that's one of the things we're doing right now. While the guys are going to be in the field, continuing to do target work, we'll model that resource and confirm if it makes sense to expand it, step out and try to expand that, or are we better just to be looking at some of these new targets? And that's why it'll be done in 2 phases. We've got some real obvious places you want to drill immediately. Yeah. And then you need some other areas where you need more work. before you want to drill it.
Sorry, and then to the Fan Camp joint venture you've got there, 75-25, they're earning in to get 50% ownership of it?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
And what do they have to do to get that 50%? And how is that JV kind of structured? Who's running it? Who makes the decisions in that?
Yeah, good question. So they sold us Heenan Mallard, this project right here. They had 100% interest. So now we own 75 of that.
Okay.
And they own 25. And the joint venture is called South Timmins. So they have 25% of both projects.
Okay.
In total, they're going to spend about 3 million to get 50% over the next couple of years. And we'll remain the operator up until that 50%. And then they'll be the operator after that. And it's 50-50. So then we'll both fund the work. I mean, we both have sort of a common interest. They don't want to develop a project like, say, a Barrick or IM Gold. You know, their interest is getting these resources drilled off and looking hopefully to exit through some of these players in the camp. Like you got an Eagle right here, Aris, Alamos, and IM Gold.
Okay.
Yeah, and we were quite keen on the Heenan Mallard project, and they've got a portfolio in Quebec, so it wasn't something they were focused on, but this gives them something a bit more meaningful, having the Shining Tree ground as well as Heenan Mallard. They were quite intrigued with the geology and the potential of this camp. So it was a good fit. Heenan Mallard, one of our technical advisors, had previously worked on it, and he's quite keen to get out and drill this, Blaine. And one of the first things we would do would be follow up on some of the discoveries Noranda made. You can see some of the results: 5 grams over 4 meters, 5 grams over 3.8 meters. Right at surface, I think the deepest hole was about 30 meters. So, a first phase program would be twinning, stepping out at these holes right at surface, seeing if you can start putting together a resource. And then we'll continue doing some of the geochem mapping, structural work outside this current area here. And then look to, in a second phase, would be testing some of those targets.
Gotcha. And would some of that testing be done this season?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. This season will be busy. Starting mid-May, we'll be in the field all year. And like I said, it'll be a combination of, in the case of Shining Tree, we did 3 of the 5 areas, 2,000 soil sample results. So there's another 1,500 or so you're going to want to finish up in the northern part of the property. So that kind of stuff you do at the same time. You'd be drilling some of the areas that are ready. And the same thing in Heenan Mallard. The same kind of work needs to be done, drilling, as well as some of the early stage work. So that'll be completed over the next 2 years.
Gotcha. And the question from the audience here on the Shining Tree, Heenan Mallard, how much has already been spent in Canadian dollars?
All right.
Well, those projects.
I won't get into the historical spend because it's I mean, with Noranda spending, they would have spent several million on that drill program before they dropped it in the 90s.
Yeah.
Which is interesting because now you've got a number of nearby mines. But my get, and then same thing with us. So I won't talk about the past operators that owned and mined this project, but I believe Platinex itself would have put in about 4 or 5 million into Shining Tree. And most of the time I've been involved in that on the board, through all this soil sampling, golden till work, and some of that drilling we talked about, the 62 holes. Yeah. And then probably a similar amount, maybe slightly less, would have been spent on Heenan Mallard by the past owner, Fan Camp. Okay. Yeah. And then, of course, like I said, Noranda would have spent several million on that. Falconbridge owns some of the ground here. They would have spent money on that. Like there's about 20 bulk samples done on Shining Tree.
Okay.
So not counting that capital.
All right.
And then the other thing that was included in that transaction where we bought Heenan Mallard was this Dorothy claim package, which I just mentioned. There's interest here. It's the extension of this Thundercloud discovery in a company called Dynasty Gold that just completed a $4 million financing with Rob McEwen as the lead. And I know this area quite well because Treasury's Goliath Goldland was operating further up in the northwest. So we picked up that interesting extension. So that something, we may do some work on it, or we could look at monetizing that. And then I'll just quickly get into our two projects, our battery metals projects in the north here. And I'll focus on W2. So now we're, Thunder Bay is down here. One of the challenges, of course, with the northern part of Ontario is it doesn't have the infrastructure you have in Sudbury and Timmins. But as I mentioned, there's a real push to develop somewhere like the Ring of Fire to be something, equivalent to what Sudbury was back, several decades ago. There are obviously operating mines. For example, you've got Equinox's Hard Rock here. Red Lake is over here. Newmont's Muscle White. So there are mines nearby. It just doesn't have the, a lot of them are fly in, fly out. So that's our royalty. We have a Big Trout Lake. That is our Muskrat. And then we've got the W2 project. And so within the Oxford Stall Dome, you've got these number of large intrusions. We think we've got the most significant one. It's called the Lansdowne House. It was discovered by Inco in the 70s and 80s. And then more recently in 2000, it was worked on by Aurora Platinum, which then got bought by FNX. And then, when these big producers are acquired, these projects are dropped. Eagle's Nest, which was owned by Wailu, and that bidding war for $600 million they spent on that project. That project is more advanced. The grades are higher, but very similar in terms of geology, copper, nickel, platinum, palladium. Ours is a VMS project. It's part of a major gold system that sort of moves through the Oxford Stall Dome. And we just had Barrick stake a large chunk of ground right here on the west side. You've also got chromite. And then the original platinum palladium project that our founder was involved with was called Big Trout Lake. It's located up here in the northwest, so we own a royalty on that. So in total, as mentioned, there's been about 10 million spent on the project. It's at a historical resource stage. So there's sort of three things you're going to want to do with the project. Within this area here, there's an historical resource. You're going to want to go twin and drill some of those holes. The big potential is drilling in between these holes. So for example, hole 6 and hole 20, they both drilled about 200 meters of 0.65% copper nickel equivalent. But within that, you get, higher grade 30, 40 meters of 1-2% copper nickel. And then below that, you get into another horizon of low grade copper nickel, platinum, palladium. They're all, the continuity is quite similar. You hit the copper nickel at the same widths and similar grade, and then you get into the platinum, palladium at a similar depth below that. And so the job will be to get out and drill between infill, step out in between these holes. That's about 4 to 5 kilometers. So that's something you do in the first phase, and then you'd end up with a 43-101 compliant resource, and I think it would underpin the stock. And obviously, with a project being this remote, fairly low grade, you're going to want to have a big ton type project, and that's why the infrastructure coming in place is so important. And you can see some of the numbers here. For example, 81 meters at 1.34 grams platinum palladium equivalent, 17 meters at over 2 grams platinum palladium. And it is quite an interesting project. We're going to continue focusing on that central area. But over here in the east, there's some very similar looking targets that you find at Eagle's Nest, for example. That's the project further to the east. Very similar IP looking targets out here to the east. So in sort of a second phase program, you'd look at drilling that area. And then there's this major gold system, as you can see, this shear hosted gold system that runs through about 30 kilometers of our project and continues into the Ring of Fire. It starts over here, comes through Northern Superior's land in green. And we were quite surprised to sort of see Barrick stake this ground a few weeks ago. So we're not sure what their plans are. I mean, we know their ground is not, mineralized, or the geology isn't anything significant. The real potential is through here. So we're expecting at some point they're going to want to consolidate that entire camp. And you can see there has been some high-grade gold showings as well on our project. And then you've also got titanium, vanadium drill holes from past work. and then some chromite potential as well. So that's kind of a unique part of the Ring of Fire. You've got a lot of this different mineralized potential, but we're going to focus on the copper, nickel, platinum, palladium in the central area. And that's kind of a wrap there. So just to recap, you know, the money we have now, the 2.8 million and the joint venture funds are all going to go for the most part into our gold projects. So we'll begin drilling that. We'll begin the field work next week, and we'll announce those programs. And then we're funded to do that lithium sampling work, which I didn't really get into. But that's a good first step, is to confirm some of the historical work. They were focused on nickel and copper, Inco, but there was lithium identified, and it's right at surface. White pegmatites and outcrops at surface. So you want to go in and do sort of a low cost sampling program, and then we would look at what we do with that project next. And then, as mentioned, the first phase for the copper nickel project would be drilling around the historical resource area, or the historical drilling, and look to start putting together a resource on that as well. And we were successful in getting that permitting. So that was a key thing we worked on all of last year, was getting the support from the government and the communities up there for drilling this project. So I can take some questions now if you'd like.
All right. Will the government be giving out grants for exploration in the Ring of Fire?
Grants. Yeah, well, yeah. I know Ontario's had one fund of $5 million that was completed, and we did receive 100,000 or so for the Shining Tree project. And we've actually applied. They have a new fund. I think it's about 7 million again that they just launched, and they're now making decisions on who's getting that funding. So we applied for the Muskrat Dam because how the grants work is, if they grant you, say, 200,000, you have to match it for 400,000. So it was a kind of a perfect size program, and then you get refunded that 200,000. So it's quite a good system for the government, because there's all that money is going to be put into the economy in terms of hiring geologists and sampling and field work. So it just goes back into the economy. So yeah, we have applied for a grant for the Muskrat Dam. We didn't apply for W2 just because that needs a $200,000 type program wouldn't be sufficient, obviously, to fund to drill it, because all the work's been done on that project. All you need to do is additional metallurgy, and then expand on that historical drilling. So yeah,
is that government funding essentially for kind of, it sounds like it's kind of structured so it makes sense for earlier stage exploration and sampling programs and that sort of a thing?
Oh yeah, that's the work that they want going to. Yeah, sampling, early stage work in Ontario, all commodities is my understanding. So the Ring of Fire would definitely qualify for that as well. All
right, that's a good plan. What is the most advanced royalty PTX own?
Well, yeah, I would say probably the Big Trout Lake one up here.
Yeah,
that was like a resource staged platinum palladium discovery. I'm not sure who owns that now, but that would be the most advanced, I would say, of the portfolio. So if we ever did look at monetizing our portfolio, we probably would include a royalty on our existing projects.
Yeah.
And then we've also got a royalty in Chile, and a number of other ones in Ontario, mainly Shining Tree, and then up in the Ring of Fire. So we may look to add royalties and then spin it out eventually, because we're not going to get any real value for it. Or we may look at doing something right now that I can't say too much about, but we are working on a transaction to divest and then get additional funding for our exploration.
So on the Shining Tree, you both own right now, 75%? You're going to presumably be worked down to 50%, but then you also have an NSR on top of that as well?
Not on our project. We have an NSR on projects in the area.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
gotcha.
Yeah. I'm saying if we ever did divest our portfolio, we could include a royalty on our Muskrat Dam, for example, on our, we could put an additional royalty on our projects, right? Before we sell that portfolio, we could put a royalty on our W2 project as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. Dynasty thing, which would give us about, 10 royalties in total.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, you can monetize that. You're probably, not going to get a whole lot of value in the market for it, but it could do some nice funding of exploration and development work for you. And what you've got several properties as they presumably develop and they grow and get better. Is the plan for you, are you flexible in your planning, or do you want to be a developer of these projects, or maybe as they evolve you maybe spin off a couple of them and then put your attention on sort of your premier project in there? What's the general philosophy behind growing up these projects?
Well, I mean, we don't have plans to look at developing at this point, but the next couple of years is going to be about, the exploration. Drilling is really going to make a significant difference. So for our gold portfolio, I could see us making another acquisition, for example, to grow that portfolio, and then eventually spin out the subsidiary to a separate company. Yeah. Or if we're successful enough in just developing the resources, I do think that this camp will get consolidated. I don't know who, maybe Barrick will buy all the entire area, or IAMGOLD will look to consolidate Shining Tree or Alamos. So that would be the ideal plan. And then I think with the copper nickel project, that could be a separate standalone vehicle. I mean, that once you've got that resource done, those first phase, at least that first phase of drilling done, it could be something that could be spun out. So you'd have a gold and then as well as a copper nickel separate spin out. Or, within that camp, if we're able to develop the resources this year, you've got Barrick in there now. We've got a number of Ring of Fire metals, Juno in that area, Northern Superior. My guess is there'll be others getting involved in the camp. So, there could be more consolidation. So we could just develop the resource and look to exit through a sale to someone larger in the camp. That's, next year.
All right. And can you go back to that timeline slide? You've you've mentioned the work on the different projects here, but maybe if we can have just a few minutes to summarize what catalysts and news events investors should be looking out for over, I guess, the coming quarters, over the summer months where you're going to be pretty darn busy.
Yeah. Okay, so the gold there'll be most of the news flow will be in terms of drilling Heaton Mallard and drilling Shining Tree, and that's going to get done in a couple of phases. The obvious areas right now, we'll drill in the first phase, and then in September we would continue once some of the early stage work is done in the other areas, and then do a second phase. So we'll do some in the summer as well as in the fall. The good thing is with that area, you can obviously drill year round. You can't do basic sort of prospecting obviously in the winter. And then Muskrat will be there in the summer doing the sampling work. That's not a huge program, but and it's quite low cost. So we'll do that work in the summer and get those results out in the fall, and then you can really decide what you can do there. There's a number of other lithium companies. Well, there's quite a few, as you know, in Ontario. There must be 5 or 6 sort of well-funded lithium groups now in Ontario. A number of Australians, and then there's a bunch of other juniors as well. So it's quite amazing to see the number of well-funded groups with lithium projects. I think a lot of them are going to disappoint. We're quite optimistic with the projects we put together. And then the other one would be, of course, the big development would be putting the resource out on W2. Because that would, kind of surprise the market if you came out with whatever, a 10, 20 million ton, initial resource that would really underpin the stock. So last year we put the whole thing together. We did 5 or 6 acquisitions, got the permitting, and now, the program's fully designed, and then we'll be getting up there and drilling that in the fall or winter.
All right. Okay, I think we've kind of covered the main things here. Is there anything you want to highlight before we wrap things up?
No, I don't think so. I think you know, I mean, with the shareholder base, and the asset base, with our market cap somewhere between, you know, 10 to 15 million, and we're reasonably well funded. We've got a joint venture partner, which will kick in additional funding next year as well. I think it's quite an attractive, you know, entry point. The stock looks good. It's very liquid, so you know you can't argue that the stock doesn't have a, you know, reliable pricing over the last year. And I think as we get into a stronger junior market, you know, these stocks are going to do very well. You know, and I'm also sort of committing to one sort of strategic transaction that will sort of enhance the market. You know, that, you know, could be a, you know, a combination of bringing in, closing on as like a strategic partner for that copper project, you know, sale of our royalties, you know, a number of other things that we're working on, as well as exploration. So I think, you know, you'll get this year you'll have, you know, a lot happening in terms of both exploration and strategically.
Yep. No, your projects seem to have, and your assets with the royalties and so forth, you've got a lot of optionality where if whatever this happens, that happens, you can do other things. So a lot of flexibility in your pool of assets.
Sure. Yeah, I agree.
All right, Greg.
Okay.
Well, with that, I thank you. Thanks for giving us the time to walk through the story. It's a good one in a good location, and looks like you got a good team and you got some cash to execute here. So thank you very much. Appreciate the time.
Yeah, excellent. Okay, thanks, Martin.
Cheers.
Take care. Ciao. Bye-bye.